There are gods buried in the desert, gods so old that even the ancient Egyptians feared to speak their names. They were carved out of fear, fed with blood and whispers, and then erased, but not destroyed. Because what is forgotten is only waiting. And if you start to feel watched, don't look away. Beneath the sands of Egypt, older than pyramids, older than memory itself, there are gods who have no names on tourist maps. They were worshipped when the Nile was still wild, when its yearly flood swallowed whole villages and left behind black earth, glistening like obsidian. They were the whispering gods, the hidden ones, not the radiant son of Ra or the regal falcon of Horus. They were gods of mud and darkness, of shadowed shrines carved in river caves, of offerings buried so deep the desert forgot them. Their names are not spoken anymore, but their echoes cling like dust to the stones, and if you listen long enough, you can almost hear them breathing under the silence. Long before the grandeur of Thebes or Memphis, Egypt was not a kingdom, but a patchwork of tiny river clans. Each clan guarded its own gods the way it guarded its wells. They carved their spirits into bone and clay, tucked them under reed mats, whispered to them at night. Most were animal spirits, half-seen shapes in the reeds, crocodile snouts breaking the surface, ibis wings flashing at dusk, jackal eyes glinting on the horizon. The people feared them and fed them in equal measure. They were not worshipped as ideals, they were negotiated with, like neighbors who might kill you if offended. Over time, the Nile's floods grew steadier, villages became towns. Kings arose, claiming descent from the divine. And with kings came temples, and with temples came hierarchy. Gods ranked above gods, thrones built on thrones. Rose above all the blazing sun chariot. Osiris ruled the dead, Isis the magic of birth, Horus the falcon sky, Thoth the moon's wisdom. But beneath this pantheon, beneath the temples, beneath the carved names, the older gods did not vanish. So they sank. In the temple basements, archaeologists have found strange shrines, rooms deliberately buried and sealed, their walls covered in soot, their statues crude and eyeless, offerings of river mud mixed with blood, small clay jars packed with human hair, teeth, scraps of linen. These were not the clean, radiant gods of dynastic Egypt. They were older and more human. They were the gods of hunger, of disease, of sudden drowning, of women who bled too long after birth. They were gods you prayed to when the others were silent. One of these buried gods was called Shesmu. In later texts, he is called the Lord of Perfume and Master of Wine, but his oldest images show him as a lion-headed butcher, standing over headless corpses, pressing their blood as if pressing grapes. He was said to live in the darkness below the presses where wine fermented, breathing the sweet rot. People feared him not because he was evil, but because he was necessary. Wine and perfume were sacred gifts, but their making was bloody, and Shesmu was the god who handled the blood. The priests later softened him, painted him with jars of scented oil. But in the dark, he stayed a lion with red teeth. There was also Medjed, a name appearing in only one ancient papyrus, almost by accident. He is described as invisible, striking enemies with beams from his eyes. No image of him exists, only a faint drawing of a walking shroud with legs. Some Egyptologists think he was a local ghost god, feared but never seen, whispered about by night fishermen along the river. The priests erased him from the pantheon, but children still carved little hollow-eyed figures into the mud near their houses, hoping Medjed would watch over their sleep. And then there was Ammit the Devourer. In later myths, she appears in the judgment hall, half crocodile, half lion, half hippopotamus, a stitched beast who devours the hearts of the unworthy. But before she stood in the judgment hall, she lived in the river reeds, lurking where crocodiles nested. People threw the first catch of the season to her. They said if she was not fed, the river would take a child. When the temples grew powerful, Ammit was brought inside as a servant of justice. But she began as hunger itself. These forgotten gods were not erased. They were buried. Priests called it purification. They sealed their shrines with stone and poured sand over the doors. They washed the names from the walls, but they did not destroy them, because they were still needed. The priests knew, for every sun god there must be a shadow. And shadows do not die. Sometimes, during renovations of old temples, workers break into sealed chambers no one has seen in 4,000 years. Inside, they find small altars blackened by fire, statues with no faces, jars of dried river silt. The air inside is heavy, bitter, like copper and roses. Local workers often refuse to go back in. They say the rooms are still occupied. There are stories of farmers near Asyut who dug a well and struck a buried shrine. That night, their cattle refused to enter the corral. The next day, the farmer poured milk into the hole and whispered, "We did not mean to open your house." And the cattle returned. Even today, the desert occasionally exhales these gods. After a storm, shards of bone idols rise from the sand, like memories surfacing from sleep. They have no inscriptions, no names. Mulayais. Egypt's official religion lasted 3,000 years, and in that time, gods rose and fell like dynasties. Aten, the sun disappeared, burned brightly for one pharaoh, and then vanished. Thoth reigned in one era, faded in the next. But the hidden gods endured, because they were not about empire or glory. They were about survival. They belonged to the people who lived at the edge of the flood, who buried their children in the wet black soil and begged the river not to rise again. And perhaps they endure still. When the wind blows through broken pylons, when the sand hisses against your skin like whispering teeth, when the Nile glimmers black in moonlight and you feel watched, perhaps it is not Ra or Horus or Osiris you are feeling. Perhaps it is the ones who never left, the forgotten gods, still dreaming under the sand, waiting for the world to remember their names. In the cool half-light of dawn, when the desert is still and even the wind seems to hesitate, the ruins of ancient Egypt look eternal. But eternity is an illusion. Stone crumbles, names fade, and what survives is often what was meant to be forgotten. When the pharaohs rose, they did not merely build temples, they rewrote the world. They gathered the scattered gods of the Nile into an ordered empire of heaven. Each god received a title, a domain, a proper icon carved into gleaming limestone. Chaos became hierarchy, and anything that resisted this order was declared dangerous, impure, unfit for worship. But the people remembered anyway. In village courtyards far from the royal cities, offerings still smoldered on small stone altars after sunset. Women still tied knots in red string to ward off spirits no priest would name. The fishermen left fish bones on the riverbank for the old gods of the water. Children whispered the names of things they were told did not exist. Because forgetting does not come from decree. It comes from silence. The priests feared silence. Silence is where the hidden gods lived. So they filled the air with hymns, reciting the names of the sanctioned deities at dawn, noon, and dusk, beating drums to drive out whatever lingered between words. They painted the walls of temples with endless lines of praise, as if drowning the stones in names could keep the unnamed from slipping through the cracks. But the cracks widened. The Nile itself betrayed them. Its floods could not be commanded, only measured after they came. Sometimes it rose too high, drowning fields and children. Sometimes it shrank, leaving only dust. In those years, people turned not to Re or Osiris, but to the buried gods, the ones who had always ruled chaos. They dug up old idols from the edge of the fields and left food at their feet. And when the river rose again, they buried them once more. It was not worship. It was survival. One of these river-edge gods was called Heket, the frog-headed spirit of birth. In the grand temples she was tame, shown holding the Ankh, blessing the birth of kings. But older charms show her crouched and wet, half animal, half woman, her belly swollen, her fingers clawed. Midwives whispered her name only in secret, for fear the priests would accuse them of witchcraft. But they still placed tiny frog amulets under the pillows of laboring mothers, hoping Heket would come hopping from the dark water to guide the child safely into breath. Another was Bez, a dwarf god, bearded, tongue protruding, crowned with feathers and snakes. He was never part of the great pantheon. He was too ugly, too chaotic, too alive. He danced in the corners of houses, drove away nightmares, protected the helpless. Families carved him into their bedposts, their mirrors, even their makeup kits. He leered at demons and frightened them away. To the temples, Bes was a nuisance, a comic figure. But to the people, he was hope, proof that something fierce still guarded their sleep. The great kings tried to erase these household gods. They sent officials to confiscate amulets, to break the small altars in village homes. They called it purification, but the amulets always returned. Bes's round face, Hecte's frog grin, they kept reappearing, carved into door frames, hidden in wall cracks, scratched into the backs of mirrors. It was as if the people could not stop making them, or as if the gods themselves refused to stay gone. And in the silence between the chants, in the dark gaps of the temples, even the priests sometimes felt it, the presence of something watching. There are fragments of letters from young temple acolytes who wrote of shadows that move when no torch burns, of whispers in the sealed corridors, of eyes in the cracks of the stones. Most of these writings were later scratched out, but a few survived, buried under rubble, protected by accident. Centuries passed, dynasties rose and fell, Persians came, then Greeks, then Romans. Each brought their own gods and layered them over Egypt like paint over paint. But beneath it all, the older gods persisted, like roots pushing up through stone. When the Greeks arrived, they renamed the Egyptian gods, merging them with their own. Thoth became Hermes Trismegistus. Isis became a universal mother. But the hidden gods did not merge. They slipped into the shadows between cultures, becoming ghosts. Travelers wrote of strange rituals in the countryside, of villagers chanting to nameless spirits before harvest, of black jars buried under thresholds. The Greeks dismissed it as superstition, but they never went near the jars. And when Christianity came, bringing the cross and the promise of one God, the old temples were broken, statues were toppled, their faces chiseled off. The hieroglyphs were defaced, priests were driven out, monasteries rose on temple ruins. But even then, the hidden gods did not vanish. Desert monks wrote of dreams in which jackal-headed shadows stood at the foot of their beds. They sprinkled salt in the corners of their cells to keep the old ones away. In some monasteries, new converts were made to spit on amulets of Bez and break them with hammers. But the amulets were always found whole again the next day, tucked in cracks of the walls. To this day, villagers near Dendera say there are wells that must never be drained. They say the water is not just water, that something ancient moves beneath it. No one drinks from these wells. Children are told not to look into them, not even in daylight. If you ask why, the elders say only because the old gods live down there, and they do not like to be seen. And perhaps they are right. Perhaps the hidden gods never truly died, because they were never meant to be adored. They were meant to be feared, quietly, respectfully, like deep water or dark woods. They were not made of sunlight and order. They were made of the things humans cannot control: birth, death, decay, blood, night, chance. Things the temples could not conquer, only pretend to. Every empire builds walls against the dark, but the dark waits. It does not rage or cry or demand. It simply weighs. And Egypt's forgotten gods are patient. They have watched kingdoms rise and crumble to sand. They have watched their own names vanish from the lips of the living. Still they wait, deep in the earth, listening. And sometimes, On windless nights when the moon is a thin blade and the Nile is black glass, people say they hear something beneath the water. A low hum, older than words, older than the pyramids. The sound of forgotten gods breathing in their sleep. They say the gods are gone. But sometimes it feels as if they are only sleeping, like crocodiles sunk beneath black water, waiting without breath or motion, waiting as centuries drift over them like silt. In museums, they stand behind glass in perfect stillness, stone faces with blank eyes. Children press their hands to the glass and whisper, but the statues do not answer. Tourists pass by with cameras, their footsteps echoing on marble floors. They see relics, but relics are only dead things, and these are not dead. Even stripped of temples and priests, some gods survive in symbols, like seeds sleeping in dry ground. They sprout not in stone shrines, but in dreams. They slip into the human mind the way the Nile seeps through cracks in the riverbank at night. Silent, patient, you do not notice when they arrive. You notice only that something ancient has touched you, something nameless that leaves the air cold and the heart strangely heavy. Psychologists have names for it: archetypes, collective unconscious, shadow self. But the ancient Egyptians might have understood it more clearly. They believed every soul had a ka, a double, that lived in the unseen world, and a ba, a bird-like essence that wandered in dreams. They believed thoughts could become spirits if fed long enough, that fear itself could harden into a god. Perhaps that is what the forgotten gods became. Not names or statues, but shapes of fear sleeping in the blood. They need no temples now. They live in the places humans do not look directly, in the space between waking and sleep, in the darkness at the corner of your vision when you turn your head and nothing is there. There are travelers who say that in the deserts west of Luxor, when the wind dies and the stars are sharp enough to cut, they dream of things they cannot name. Not people, not animals. Just presence, huge and silent, pressing on the edges of the mind like deep water. They wake with sand in their mouth and the feeling that something has been staring at them all night. They do not go back to those places. Even in cities far from the Nile, echoes remain. In the old quarters of Cairo, children still paint watchful eyes on their doors to keep away spirits. They do not know why. They only say their grandmothers taught them. The eyes are always the same, wide, lidless, black pupils floating in white. They look almost like the painted eyes on the coffins of ancient Egypt, the eyes that let the dead see out. In markets, vendors hang charms of frogs, dwarfs, lions, crocodiles. They call them lucky. They do not know the names, but the shapes are older than their words, older than the city itself. Sometimes the gods slip even further, into places with no connection to Egypt at all. In Europe, children leave bowls of milk by the door for the little guardians. In India, women tie red threads to ward off the evil eye, threads almost identical to the old Nile knots tied for Hecate. In South America, there are masks with grinning, bearded faces startlingly like the names have changed, but the shapes have not. They surface like bubbles from a deep well, rising through cultures that have forgotten their source. Dream researchers speak of recurring symbols that appear in the minds of people who have never met. Black water, staring eyes, silent animal-headed figures. They appear in drawings by children, in the night terrors of the elderly, in the fever dreams of the sick. And when shown ancient Egyptian amulets, these people sometimes go pale. They say, "I've seen that," but they cannot say where. It is as if the forgotten gods have scattered themselves like seeds into the human mind, hidden in the soil of sleep. They do not need belief. They only need memory, and memory does not have to be conscious. Archaeologists sometimes speak reluctantly of a feeling that comes over them in certain tombs. Not fear exactly, not awe, but a heaviness like standing under water. They say their ears ring, their hearts slow, their breath grows shallow. They work faster in those places. They do not linger. They never speak of it in their reports. But when they leave, they walk quickly until the desert air feels light again. Even science cannot quite push them away. CT scans of mummies reveal strange amulets tucked deep inside wrappings. Tiny black frogs, bearded dwarves, blank-eyed masks. Many are not listed in temple records. No one knows who placed them or why. They should not be there, and yet there they are, resting close to ancient hearts, as if guarding them still. And then there are the dreams. There is a pattern whispered among Egyptologists. Those who spend too long in the old tombs begin to dream of water. Black, still water. Sometimes they see ripples as if something has just gone under. Sometimes a shape rises, half animal, half shadow, but they always wake before they see its face. They laugh about it in the daylight, but some stop returning to the field. The ancient Egyptians believed names gave life. To raise a name was to kill twice, first the body, then the soul. Yet these gods survive, nameless. Perhaps that is why they endure. They are not bound to words, only to fear and memory, and fear does not fade. It speaks. It waits. Maybe that is why they slip so easily into our world. A forgotten god does not announce itself. It waits in the corners of rooms, in the crack between waking and dream, in the silence after the last word. It waits for an opening, a moment of stillness, of vulnerability, and then it moves, not loudly, just enough for you to feel watched. Even now, as the world hums with lights and machines and satellites circle the earth like artificial moons, people still whisper when the power goes out. They light candles. They tell stories. They keep watch against the dark. And perhaps the dark is watching back because darkness remembers. And so do gods. Somewhere beneath the desert, in chambers no living foot has touched in 5,000 years, the air is perfectly still. Stone walls sweat cold in the absence of light. No sound moves. No breath stirs. But if you listen, not with ears, but with the bones of your skull, with the blood in your teeth, you might hear something.
Low heartbeat, older than words, older than pyramids, older than kings. It is the sound of waiting, the sound of gods who are never meant to be worshipped, only feared.
Gods who are not gone, only sleeping. Memory is not harmless. To remember something is to give it breath again, to call it from its grave. And memory has a strange way of working. It does not always follow will. It slips sideways, surfacing in fragments, in patterns, in half-forgotten shapes. It begins with a dream, a word you cannot place, a shadow that feels familiar. That is how resurrection begins. The ancient Egyptians believed this deeply. They feared being forgotten more than they feared death. A body could decay, that was natural. But if a name was erased, the soul dissolved like smoke. This was called the second death, the true death. That is why they carved names on every wall, sealed them inside every tomb, spoke them aloud every year. To be remembered was to exist. To be forgotten was to vanish. But what happens if something that was meant to vanish begins to be remembered? What if a name erased 5,000 years ago whispers itself back into the mind of a living soul? There are stories, by its stories, told among the archaeologists and dismissed in public. A man cataloging amulets in a museum in Turin who began speaking in an unknown language while asleep, a language later identified as Old Egyptian from the pre-dynastic period. A woman who excavated a sealed shrine near Aswan and afterward refused to enter buildings with closed doors. She slept only outdoors until the day she disappeared. A photographer who developed his film from inside a forgotten temple and found shapes on the negatives that were not in the room, shapes like enormous eyes, floating just above the floor. They say memory's harmless, but memory's a door, and doors open both ways. When you speak the names of old things, you are not just calling them to you, you are also stepping toward them. And the forgotten gods have been waiting a very, very long time. They do not need temples or offerings. They need only attention, even silent attention, even the act of thinking, what if they are real, is enough to stir them. Like dust rising when you open a sealed room, like breath returning to something long still. Imagine this. Somewhere in the desert, a sealed chamber lies beneath 6 meters of sand and collapsed stone. Inside, the air has not moved in 50 centuries. No light, no sound, no touch of the living. But deep in that silence, carved in soot on the walls, are names. Not the shining names of Ra or Osiris. Older names, short, harsh sounds like cracking bone, and perhaps, just perhaps, they are listening. When someone far away dreams of black water, when someone else draws lidless eyes without knowing why, when another hums a tune they do not remember learning, perhaps the chamber stirs. Perhaps a grain of sand falls. Perhaps something ancient shifts almost imperceptibly in the dark. The old Egyptians would have understood this. They knew that thoughts were offerings, that words were seeds. To think of a god was to feed it, and the forgotten gods are hungry. Hunger is what they were born from. Hunger for safety, for children to survive, for the river not to drown the fields. Hunger for explanations when the night was full of eyes. That hunger shaped them. It gave them faces, teeth, claws, names. And hunger does not die. It waits. The modern world thinks it has no need of such gods. We have lights to drive back the dark, machines to tame the river, medicine to quiet the terror of birth. But beneath all that, the hunger is still there. We still fear what we cannot see. We still whisper to the dark, even if we call it hope or superstition or instinct. And that is the crack the forgotten gods are waiting for, the thin seam where reason falters, where fear leaks through. They do not come through force. They come through longing. Imagine a world where fear grows again, where the rivers rise, where the lights fail, where certainty crumbles. People will reach back into the dark, searching for something older than order, older than hope. And the forgotten gods will be waiting. Not as golden statues, but as shapes in dreams, whispers in water, shadows that move when no one breathes. They will come not as conquerors, but as memories. Quiet, slow, patient. And the world will not even realize they have returned until it is too late. Because they do not announce themselves. They seep, they curl like smoke under doors. They bloom like mole in corners no one looks at. They settle in stories, in lullabies, in rituals whispered half-jokingly around fires when the power goes out. They will not demand temples. They will not demand blood at first. They will only ask to be remembered. A child will hum a tune no one taught them. A woman will dream of black water and wake with her mouth full of sand. Man will see eyes watching from the corner of his room, and when he looks, nothing will be there. And slowly, softly, the shape of the world will begin to shift. The forgotten gods do not want worship. They want presence. They want to be here, and if they return, they will not rebuild their old shrines or wear their old names. They will wear us, because gods are what we make with our fear, and our fear is endless. We will carve them from our own minds. We will speak their voices in our sleep. We will carry them in our blood, the way our ancestors did, the way the river once carried their names to the sea. And perhaps this has already begun. Perhaps every whisper about them, every thought, every retelling of their story, even this one, is another breath blown into their lungs. Another crack in the seal of their tomb, another step toward waking. Somewhere, deep under the desert, in darkness older than kings, something shifts. A single grain of sand slides off stone. The silence trembles, and in that blackness, a sound, like the first inhalation in 50 centuries, stirs the air. Something remembers. Something waits. Something is listening. It would not happen all at once. There would be no lightning cracking the sky, no temples bursting from the sand in a blaze of gold. They would return the way they'd vanished, silently, grain by grain, breath by breath, in ways too small to notice until it was far too late. It might begin with water, black water seeping from cracks in the stones of Cairo's oldest buildings. Not much, just a thin dark line where no pipe runs, no rain has fallen. It would smell faintly of copper and flowers, sharp and sweet like the air of tombs. People would wipe it away, and it would return. Then animals. Frogs appearing in dry courtyards after decades of absence. Cats gathering at doorways, staring inward as if waiting for something to come out. Crocodiles surfacing where the Nile has been empty for years, basking in moonlight without moving, their eyes like black mirrors. At first it would seem like coincidence, nature reclaiming what was once hers. But the patterns would grow. Everywhere eyes. Eyes scratched into walls overnight, eyes painted by children on paper they cannot explain, eyes appearing in condensation on windows, in the foam of morning coffee, in the grain of wood. Always the same shape, lidless, unblinking, watching. People would start to dream, millions scattered across continents, dreaming of the same thing. A great chamber of stone deep beneath sand, filled with still water. They would walk into it barefoot, their steps echoing. They would see shapes just beneath the surface, shapes too large to be fish, too still to be alive. They would wake with the taste of dust on their tongue and the feeling of being followed by something just outside the corner of their sight. At first they would tell no one. The dreams would feel private, sacred somehow, like secrets not meant to be spoken. But the dreams would persist. Night after night, the same water, the same silence, and slowly the shapes in the water would rise. Meanwhile, things would begin to go missing. Not objects, certainties. People would stand in rooms and not remember why they entered. They would look at their own hands and not know whose they were for half a breath. Time would slip, clocks stuttering, days blending, conversations trailing into nothing. Reality fraying, thread by invisible thread. And then the voices would begin. Soft at first, beneath the hum of electricity, beneath the static of radios, beneath the bloodbeat in your ears. Whispers, not in any language you know, yet heavy with meaning. They would not call your name. They would not need to. You would know they were speaking to you. By then it would be too late to stop, because they would not be coming from outside. They would be rising from inside, from the oldest places in the mind, the places built before words. They would not appear as statues or beasts. They would appear as impulses, as certainties that slide into you like hooks. You would feel them rather than see them. The need to kneel in an empty room, the urge to cover mirrors, the conviction that you must not speak aloud after dark. People would begin to change. Not visibly, not at first. A woman would stop sleeping indoors and only rest in doorways, staring at the horizon. A man would hum the same three-note tune for hours without pause, even in his sleep. Children would draw spiral patterns that turn into eyes if you looked too long. Doctors would find nothing wrong, but their shadows would stretch too far behind them, like smoke in windless air. And then the first will forget their names. They will speak in voices not their own, words older than the alphabet. Their eyes will go blank, as if something ancient is staring through them, tasting the world. They will walk into water and not return. And those who see them will feel the pull, a sweetness like falling asleep in deep black water. They will not resist for long, because the forgotten gods will not come as conquerors. They will come as homecoming. They will come as the soft, slow realization that you were never alone, that you were always watched, that your fear has a shape and it has been waiting. And when you feel that, you will not fight. You will kneel. Across the world, lights will flicker and die. Cities will go silent, not from destruction, but from stillness. People will lay down their machines. They will gather at riverbanks, at wells, at doorways, leaving offerings without knowing why.
Milk, blood, with songs hummed through their teeth like prayer. And in the deserts of Egypt, the sand will crack like an eggshell. Stone will heave. The air will tremble as if the earth itself has drawn a breath. And from the black chambers beneath the dunes, the forgotten gods will rise. Not as they were carved, not lions or crocodiles or dwarves or frogs. Those were only masks. They will rise as what they truly are. Hunger given shape, silence given voice, fear made flesh. Their forms will shimmer like heat, never fully seen, only sensed, vast, faceless, pressing against the edges of sight like the weight of deep water. They will have no mouths, yet every voice will speak their names.
They will have no eyes, yet nothing will be unwatched.
And the world will not scream. It will sigh, softly as if relieved, because deep down it has been waiting for them. Because the old hunger never died, and only forgot its name. The gods will not rebuild their temples. The world itself will become their shrine. Streets will twist like intestines, windows will darken like closed eyes, rivers will run backward under the weight of their gaze. The sun will falter. The moon will turn its face away, and humanity will not fight. It will kneel. It will remember. And the forgotten gods, at last, will be forgotten no more.
There will be no war. No screams, no fire, no last desperate resistance. The end will be quiet, like dust settling, like breath leaving. The forgotten gods will not rule. They will not speak decrees or demand worship. They will only be, and that will be enough. Already, language will begin to slip. Words will crumble in the mouth, letters curling like ash. People will speak in fragments, then in hums, then in silence. Names will be the first to go. You will wake and not know your own. You will see others and feel only a faint tug, as if they are shapes you once dreamed but cannot place. Memory will unravel next. Days will no longer stack into weeks. They will drift apart, like dry leaves. Work will be forgotten, clocks ignored. Children will wander from their homes and never be sought, because no one will remember that they were supposed to exist. The world will not collapse. It will dissolve. Streets will empty without panic. Markets will stand with their stalls full and untouched, fruit turning to dust under a sun that grows dim and cold. Dogs will lie down in doorways and sleep without waking. The wind will stop. Time itself will slow, thickening like resin. Shadows will stretch until they blur into one endless dusk. The stars will dim, not by distance, but by disinterest, as though the sky is forgetting how to shine. Seasons will blur. Rivers will pause between tides and never finish their return. And in this stillness, the forgotten gods will spread, not walking, not flying, but seeping through stone, through bone, through thought. They will press through walls like cold, through hearts like longing. They will not speak. They will not need to. Everyone will understand them, though no one will know what they are. People will stop looking at one another, not from fear, but because faces will mean nothing. They will sit in rooms together like stones in a riverbed, touched by the same slow current, but never meeting. Their eyes will be open, but they will see only the dark shapes moving gently behind their thoughts. They will smile faintly like sleepers, and then the bodies will begin to empty, not by death. Death requires endings, and endings will have gone. The flesh will remain, standing or seated or lying in sunlit fields, but the weight inside will be gone. What was human will have been carried away, drop by drop, into the deep black water where the gods dwell. They will not mourn. They will not even notice. You cannot mourn what you no longer remember. The cities will become hollow shells. Windows dark, doors swinging in windless air. Sand will drift across the floors, settle on counters, pour through elevator shafts like soft rain. Vines will creep across the glass towers without breaking them. Cars will rust into silence. Eye lines will fade into dunes. Only the eyes will remain. Eyes painted on doorways, scratched into walls staring from the bark of old trees. Eyes blinking slowly in the patterns of clouds. Eyes opening on the surface of still water. They will be the last movement in the world. And they will not blink. Far beneath, in the black chambers under the desert, the forgotten gods will rest. They will not move. They will not breathe. They will simply exist, vast and formless, filling every hollow thing with their stillness. They will no longer be separate from the world. They will be the world, and what was human will linger only as an echo. A faint warmth in the stones where hands once touched. A sigh in the wind that sometimes stirs and then forgets why. A ghost of laughter in the shells of cities that no longer have names. Eventually even that will fade, and there will be nothing left but silence. Silence as deep as the Nile before it had a name. Silence older than pyramids, older than kings, older than the first spark of fear in the first human heart. In that silence, the forgotten gods will dream. Their dreams will be slow, dark, endless. They will dream of the river swallowing the sun. They will dream of the world closing its eyes. They will dream of the moment when they were first imagined, when they rose from hunger and shadow and breath, and became more than fear. They will dream forever, and the world will sleep with them.